The land stretches endless in every direction, golden plains giving way to rolling hills, wind whispering through the sparse trees. A storm lingers on the horizon, the sky bruised purple. The Whitmore Ranch sits at the center of it all, a modest homestead that has seen better days. A simple wooden cross stands in freshly turned soil. The wind kicks up dust curling around Eleanor Whitmore, who stands motionless before her husband's grave. James Whitmore is dead, buried in the earth, just a pile of bones and regrets now. She doesn't cry. She doesn't kneel in prayer. Instead, she stares at his name, carved in crude letters into the wood. Her black dress, a remnant of her southeastern upbringing, feels like a costume now. Too clean, too proper for a place like this. In her hands, she clutches a folded letter, a list of debts owed to the bank and a final warning from the land office. She takes a shaky breath, kneeling slowly, presses a gloved hand to the dirt as if waiting for an answer. She speaks quietly.
You always were a liar, James. I don't even know if you are worth all this trouble.
The wind shifts, carrying a faint burning smell. Just the kitchen fire, she tells herself. She tucks the letter into her pocket and stands. The sun sinks lower, casting the plains in molten gold. She walks back toward the house, her shadow stretched long behind her. The small home is quiet. Too quiet. Candles flicker in their holders. The fireplace sits unlit, the shadows stretching long across the wooden floor. Eleanor moves through the dimly lit kitchen, setting a single plate at the table. She then sits, staring at a hand-drawn map she found among James's things. The loneliness is suffocating. She pulls a ledger book closer, running a finger down the columns of debt. The numbers don't lie. James left her with nothing but bills. A knock shatters the silence. She stiffens, hand hovering over the rifle propped against the table. Another knock, louder. She moves toward the window, carefully peeling back the curtain. A man on horseback. Not the bank collector. Not a neighbor. A stranger. The man dismounts, a scarred brute with a black duster and cold eyes.
Evening. Mrs. Whitmore, I presume.
Eleanor cracks the door slightly.
If you don't certainly mind, I need to have word with you.
And with whom do I have the wonderful privilege of speaking?
The man smiles, showing yellowed teeth.
Just a fella, looking for something your husband owed me. Now, I intend you no harm, ma'am. So long as we get what we came here for, it's really up to you on how this all plays out.
He steps closer, boots heavy on the porch.
Now we can have a nice talk, and you can hand it over. Or we can make this harder than it needs to be.
The hairs on Eleanor's neck rise. Behind him, 3 more riders spread out near the barn. One carries an oil canister. She grips the rifle behind the door.
I don't have anything of James. Whatever business you had with him ain't got nothing to do with me. So, you'd better go on and leave my property, if you know what's good for you.
The man sighs, rolling a matchstick between his fingers.
Now see, that's just where you and I differ. I'm not leaving without what I came for.
The other men start spreading out, pulling oil canisters from their saddlebags. He flicks the match, letting the tiny flame dance. Behind him, the first torch is thrown. The barn ignites. Eleanor gasps, shutting the door, but he catches it, getting his foot in.
This is your last chance, ma'am. Hand over that fucking map. I hope you don't think that we rode all the way out here just to take nothing. Well, we're taking something. Either that map, or your life.
The word cuts through her. Map. She doesn't know what it means, but James left behind something these men want, and they'll burn everything down to get it. She shoves the rifle barrel into his gut. Boom! The shot rips through him. He staggers, howling. But he isn't dead. Eleanor runs, grabbing the satchel of belongings off the table. Flames roar into the sky. The outlaws shout, closing in. Eleanor bolts toward the trees, dodging gunfire. Her lungs burn. Her heart slams against her ribs. Then, a sudden flash of movement. A black horse thunders toward her. Someone leans down, snatching her by the arm. She barely registers the woman's face before the horse whisks her away into the night. The last thing she sees, her home collapsing into fire. Eleanor wakes to the sound of cracking branches. Her body aches, bruised and stiff. She's wrapped in a heavy fur cloak, one that isn't hers. A fire crackles nearby. A horse stands tethered to a tree, and a woman watches her. Nokoma. Tall, steady, her face without expression. She turns a rabbit on a spit, not looking up as Eleanor stirs.
You sleep like a woman who hasn't run for her life before.
Eleanor tries to sit up, pain flaring through her ribs.
Who the hell are you?
Nokoma glances at her, unimpressed.
The one who saved you from certain death.
Eleanor's mind is a whirl. The fire, the men, the map. She instinctively reaches inside her dress. The parchment is still there. Nokoma notices. Her eyes narrow slightly.
That paper there, that is why they came after you, correct?
Eleanor doesn't answer. Nokoma tosses her a canteen.
There, drink. You are of no use to me if you are dead.
Eleanor glares but takes a sip. She studies the woman across from her. Nokoma isn't dressed like the other natives Eleanor has seen. She wears sturdy leather boots, a rifle slung across her back. A woman used to survival.
So, where are we at exactly?
Not far enough.
She finally meets Eleanor's gaze.
If they came for you once, they'll come again.
Eleanor swallows. She already knows that. Her fingers curl around the edge of the map. James left something behind. Something worth killing for. And this woman, whoever she is, knows more than she's letting on. Nokoma stands, grabbing her rifle.
Eat. Rest. You'll need your strength. Trust me.
Eleanor watches her disappear into the trees. She doesn't trust this woman, but she's all she has now. The Montana wilderness is quiet, untouched and indifferent. Thick pine trees tower over the landscape, their black silhouettes cutting into the gray dawn sky. A distant wolf's howl echoes across the ridgeline, carried by the wind. A small campfire flickers weakly in a clearing, its embers barely alive. Eleanor Whitmore sits close to it, rubbing her frozen fingers together. The wind cuts through her dress like a knife. Her face is pale from the cold, exhaustion pressing heavy on her bones. A rabbit carcass roasts on a spit over the fire. Across from her, Nokoma crouches, checking the sharpness of a skinning knife against her thumb. Eleanor watches her cautiously, unsure whether to be grateful or wary of the woman who saved her.
I don't understand why you helped me.
Nokoma doesn't look up.
You were going to die. Didn't need much reason beyond that.
She tears a piece of meat from the rabbit and tosses it to Eleanor. It lands just in front of her boots. Eleanor stares at it. She hasn't eaten since yesterday morning. Her pride tells her to refuse. Her starving stomach makes the decision for her. She picks up the meat and takes a hesitant bite. Nokoma watches unimpressed.
I do not know what your plans are, but you will need more than a gun and a stiff spine to survive out here.
Eleanor swallows hard.
Well, I didn't ask for survival. I had a home. Until men like the ones who took my husband burned it to the ground.
Nokoma's eyes flicker slightly, but she says nothing. Instead, she reaches into her satchel and pulls out a small wooden pendant. She tosses it onto Eleanor's lap.
What is this?
A token of your husband's honesty, or his deceit.
Eleanor studies the engraved markings on the pendant. Blackfoot carvings, the same insignia she saw scribbled in the corner of James's map. She squints.
Where did you get this? And how do you know my husband?
Nokoma leans forward.
My son carried one just like it.
A long silence stretches between them. The fire crackles, the wind sighing through the trees. Finally, Eleanor exhales, pressing her fingers against her forehead.
You knew James. I want to know how. And now that I think about it, this explains how you were so ready to save me. What's going on here?
The truth is, I knew your husband through my son. Tahonis guided him through the lands your people stole from mine, kept him alive in storms, led him to hidden passes and safe waters. He called James a friend. Then, one day, my son went missing, and your husband came home rich.
Eleanor grips the pendant tightly, nausea twisting in her gut.
You think James had something to do with his disappearance?
Nokoma doesn't answer immediately. She just looks at Eleanor with cold, calculating certainty.
It is possible that you and I are both chasing ghosts.
The fire pops, sending a spray of sparks into the air. The morning sun peeks over the ridgeline as Eleanor and Nokoma move through the forest. Eleanor is shivering, sore, and barely keeping up. The terrain is rough, rocks shifting beneath their boots as they climb higher. Nokoma moves like a shadow, silent, confident, unaffected by the biting cold.
Where exactly are we going?
Your husband's map leads north. If I know James, and I believe I do, he buried what he was running from in the mountains.
Eleanor exhales sharply.
I just can't get my head around on how you know James so well. And he's neither mentioned you nor Tahonis.
Nokoma doesn't answer immediately. Finally, she glances at Eleanor with a blank expression.
Because my son trusted him. He has visited our lands and brought us many gifts, in exchange for our help.
Eleanor clenches her fists, but before she can respond, a rustling sound makes them both freeze. The bushes ahead shake. Nokoma draws her bow instantly. Eleanor clutches her rifle, heart beating out of her ears. The branches part. A man stumbles out. He's young, no older than 20, his face covered in dried blood and bruises. His coat is torn and he looks barely able to stand. Eleanor gasps.
Oh, dear God.
The young man collapses into the snow. Nokoma lowers her bow slightly but doesn't put it away.
Check him.
Eleanor hesitates.
He might be one of them.
Nokoma eyes the man's wounds.
Or he might know where they are.
A heavy silence. Eleanor finally kneels beside him, pressing a cautious hand to his forehead.
He's burning up. We need to get him warm.
Nokoma exhales through her nose, nodding once. She grabs the young man by the arm and slings him over her shoulder effortlessly. Eleanor stares in shock.
How the hell?
Move, widow.
The young man lies by the fire, breathing shallowly. Eleanor has wrapped him in one of Nokoma's furs, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. Nokoma sits against a tree, eyes closed, sharpening her hunting knife.
Who do you think he is?
My guess is someone who was running from the same men you were.
Eleanor looks down at him. The bruises, the healing cuts along his jaw. Finally, his eyes flicker open. He sees Eleanor first, blinks. Then, his gaze snaps to Nokoma. His entire body tenses.
No, you can't let them find me. You don't understand.
Eleanor leans forward.
Who's after you?
The young man shakes his head violently.
They'll come. They always come. They like to hunt in the dark.
Eleanor and Nokoma exchange a tense look.
Who? Tell us who.
The young man's voice drops to a whisper.
The men who killed James Whitmore. They're known as the Goats of Hell Gang. They are a merciless brood. When they find you, and they will, you won't have no trouble meeting your maker. I only got away because they were distracted by another.
Eleanor's blood runs cold. The fire crackles in the silence. Nokoma lowers her knife. She finally speaks, voice steady, quiet.
Okay, Mukti. Start talking. Leave nothing out.
The fire burns, its light casting shadows against the pines. The wind howls softly, whispering through the branches like ghostly voices. Eleanor Whitmore sits stiffly by the fire, arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes don't leave the young man lying unconscious beneath a thick fir. Beside her, Nokoma sharpens a knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel against stone the only sound between them. The night presses in from all sides. Finally, Eleanor exhales.
He hasn't moved in hours.
Nokoma doesn't look up.
He will. Fear makes a man restless, even in sleep.
Eleanor frowns, brushing her fingers over the damp cloth on his forehead.
He said they always come, that they hunt in the dark.
A pause. Nokoma's knife stills against the stone. She finally meets Eleanor's gaze.
Then we should be ready when they do.
The fire pops, sending a spray of embers into the cold night air. The world is gray with mist, the sky barely beginning to lighten. Eleanor, Nokoma, and the young man, now awake but weak, move carefully along a narrow trail, deep in the mountains. The cold bites at Eleanor's skin. Every muscle in her body aches, exhaustion settling into her bones. The young man stumbles, catching himself against a rock. Eleanor grabs his arm, helping him steady.
Easy, you need to keep moving.
He shakes his head, eyes still wild with fear.
You don't understand. If they're coming, there won't be anywhere to run. Ain't nothing you can do about it. They are professional trackers.
Eleanor exchanges a glance with Nokoma, who remains silent, watching the tree line.
Then tell us who they are. Maybe we can learn something that'll help us.
The young man hesitates. His hands tremble as he exhales.
They're all sorts of things. They're trackers, they're thugs, they're swindlers, they're even statesmen, some of them. They're bounty hunters, but not the kind that bring a man in alive. They take no prisoners at all.
Eleanor stiffens.
They work for a man named Calloway. If they're after you, it means Calloway's still looking for whatever your husband stole. And believe you me, he won't stop until one of two things happen. Either he gets what he's after, or your death. Either one. And most of the time, both.
Silence. Nokoma's jaw tightens.
Then we should move faster. Let's go.
The trail winds toward a clearing where a small cabin sits, long since abandoned. The roof is half caved in and the wooden walls are blackened with age. Eleanor thinks twice.
You sure about this?
Nokoma nods toward the tree line.
We need shelter, and if Calloway's men are tracking us, I'd rather make our stand somewhere defensible.
Eleanor exhales sharply.
I don't feel good about this. This seems like we're trapping ourselves, with nowhere to run. You saw what they did to my place. Fire is known to weed out the rats.
Unless you have a better idea, I suggest you get inside and find some cover. We're being tracked and trapped as we speak.
The young man, who is given his name as Nathaniel, watches the cabin with weary eyes.
This place feels really cursed. It ain't looking too good.
Nokoma steps forward, kicking open the door. Dust swirls in the dim light, revealing a rotting wooden table, a few scattered belongings, and something that makes Eleanor's stomach drop. A skeleton, slumped against the wall. A knife protrudes from its ribcage. The silence is thick, heavy. Nathaniel stumbles back, pale.
Oh, damn.
Eleanor swallows hard, stepping closer. She kneels beside the body, staring at the remains of a leather satchel half buried in dust. Carefully, she pries it open. Inside, she finds a tattered journal. The name written inside sends ice through her veins. James Whitmore. Eleanor's breath hitches.
Oh my God, this was his.
She opens it, flipping through fragile pages filled with frantic scrawl. Her husband's last written words. The fire is flickering, making it somewhat difficult to see in the now dimly lit cabin. Eleanor sits alone, reading through James's journal, her fingers trembling over the pages. Nokoma stands by the window, watching the darkness outside. Nathaniel sleeps in the corner, exhaustion finally taking him.
Sounds like he knew he was being followed. Hunted even.
Nokoma glances over. Eleanor reads aloud.
Calloway won't stop hunting me. I tried to warn Tahonis, but I think it's too late. If I don't make it back, the map will lead her to the truth.
Her voice breaks slightly on the last sentence. She presses her fingers to the ink-stained page, her stomach wrenching.
He was trying to fix something, wasn't he?
Nokoma doesn't answer immediately. Finally, she steps forward.
Your husband played a dangerous game. He stole something, and he knew there would be blood for it.
Eleanor clenches her fists.
Then why leave the map for me? Why involve me in any of this?
Nokoma watches her. Finally, she speaks, her voice softer now.
Maybe he wanted you to finish what he couldn't. Obviously, he got away with the theft and has buried it somewhere. He must have figured that if he were to die, then you should have it versus them. At least, that's how I see it.
The words hang heavy in the air. Eleanor closes the journal. Her hands stop shaking. She looks up, firelight reflecting in her eyes. She makes a decision.
Then we find Calloway before he finds us.
Nokoma nods once. The sun creeps over the ridgeline. The land is quiet, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and lingering smoke from last night's fire. Eleanor Whitmore stands near the edge of the clearing, staring out at the endless stretch of mountains and valleys before her. Her hands tremble slightly, James's tattered journal clutched to her chest. Behind her, Nokoma adjusts the strap of her rifle, eyes scanning the tree line with the patience of a seasoned hunter. Nathaniel, still groggy from sleep, rubs at the bruises on his face and winces as he shifts on his feet.
What's the plan now? Keep running? Just know, I ain't got no qualms with that part.
Eleanor doesn't answer immediately. She flips open James's journal, rereading the last entries for what feels like the 100th time. Finally, she looks up.
We're not running anymore. If we keep running, then that's all we'll ever do. And that ain't living. Besides, if we're gonna die, I'd rather die fighting.
Nokoma raises a brow.
You sure about that, Widow? Because Calloway's coming, and standing still ain't a great strategy either.
Eleanor exhales, her grip tightening on the book.
James didn't want me to run. He left this map so I could find out what really happened to him. To your son.
Nokoma's expression flickers for just a second. Too fast for Eleanor to read, but she doesn't argue. Nathaniel shifts, glancing between them.
And what exactly are we supposed to do? Ride into Calloway's camp with a prayer? An injured man and 2 women versus the goats of hell? Please tell me you got a better plan than that.
Eleanor shakes her head, stepping forward.
I was thinking more along the lines of we find what James was trying to protect. Whatever this map leads to, it's the reason he was killed. And if we get to it first, maybe we stand a chance of stopping Calloway before he finds us. You said that they were involved with statesmen and important people, so maybe there's a chance we can turn them in. I don't know. You got something better in mind?
Utter silence. Then Nokoma smirks, shaking her head.
Guess I should have known you wouldn't back down easy. You're tougher than I thought.
She slings her rifle over her shoulder and nods.
Let's go find your damn treasure then.
Eleanor nods back, determination settling into her bones. This is it. The final trail begins. The terrain is rugged and steep, the wind howling through the trees as Eleanor, Nokoma, and Nathaniel make their way deeper into the mountains. Eleanor's legs burn with exhaustion, but she refuses to stop. She glances down at the map, tracing the path James had marked. A hidden valley, somewhere north. Nathaniel trudges beside her, muttering under his breath.
You ever think maybe your husband was just real bad at gambling? Maybe this whole thing's just about a debt he couldn't pay. I mean, come on.
Eleanor shoots him a glare.
James was many things, but careless wasn't one of them. I'd appreciate it if you didn't run your mouth about things you don't know. Show some proper respect.
Nathaniel snorts.
Alls I'm saying is, tell that to the bullet holes in his body.
Nokoma slaps the back of his head.
Less talking, more moving.
Nathaniel grumbles but falls silent. The wind picks up, sending a low whistle through the pines. That's when Eleanor hears it. A sound beneath the wind, distant, hollow, like a bell ringing from deep inside the earth. She stops, frowning.
You guys hear that?
Nokoma and Nathaniel pause, listening. Then it comes again, a distant metallic clang. Nokoma's brow furrows.
Sounds like it's coming from underground.
Eleanor's heart thumps. She checks the map again. Then she sees it, a tiny marking near the final destination, a symbol she hadn't recognized before. A mine entrance. She looks up at Nokoma, realization hitting her like a freight train.
James wasn't hiding only money. He was hiding everything, in the mine.
Nokoma nods slowly.
Then that's where we go.
The entrance to the mine looms before them, a gaping black maw cut into the side of the mountain. The old wooden support beams groan against the wind. Eleanor swallows hard. Something about this place feels wrong. Nathaniel shudders.
Please tell me we're not actually going in there.
Eleanor steps forward.
We most certainly are.
She grips the oil lantern on her pack, striking a match to ignite the wick. Nokoma takes point, rifle at the ready. Nathaniel mutters a curse. Then together they step inside. The air inside is stale and cold, thick with the scent of damp earth and rust. The lantern casts flickering light against the rough rock walls. The deeper they go, the more Eleanor feels it, an oppressive weight in the air. Something happened here. Something bad. Nathaniel shivers.
I gotta tell you, this place just ain't natural.
Eleanor ignores him, focusing on the walls. Then, she sees it, scrawled into the rock in faded black ink, Tahonis. Her breath catches. She reaches out, tracing the name with her fingers. Nokoma stiffens beside her. For the first time, Eleanor sees something in her expression. Pain.
He was here.
The realization hits hard. James and Tahonis were both here, and only one of them made it out. A loud creaking noise echoes through the mine. Nathaniel tenses.
Uh-oh, that ain't normal.
Then, a gunshot shatters the silence. A bullet ricochets off the rock. Eleanor barely has time to react before a shadow moves in the darkness. Calloway's men have found them. Gunfire explodes through the cavern. The echoes are deafening, bouncing off the jagged rock walls. Eleanor dives behind an old wooden support beam, heart hammering in her chest. Dust and splinters rain down around her as a bullet rips through the beam an inch from her head. Nokoma crouches low beside a crumbling rock pile, rifle steady in her hands. Nathaniel is on his stomach, half shielded behind an overturned mining cart. The lantern Eleanor had been holding lies shattered on the rocky floor, the flames sputtering out. They are in complete darkness. The only light is from the flicker of torches held by the men hunting them. A voice booms from the shadows.
I was hoping you'd come this far, Mrs. Whitmore. You saved me the trouble of digging up that map myself.
Eleanor grits her teeth, gripping the cold steel of her revolver.
I don't know what you're looking for, Calloway, but I promise you, it's not yours.
Hello chuckle. The sound slithers through the cavern like a snake.
Neither was your husband's life, but he took something from me. And now, you've taken something too. Have a look around. You got nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. So I suggest you stop playing this cat and mouse game and make this easy on yourself. Are you willing to get your friends killed over this?
He is trying to rattle you. Do not let him.
I wasn't planning on it.
She peers through the darkness, trying to count the figures beyond the torchlight. At least 6 men. Too many. Nokoma reloads her rifle in silence, her movements measured and precise. Nathaniel, breath ragged, clutches his side. He's been nicked. A graze across his ribs. Eleanor leans toward him.
Nathaniel, are you okay? Can you move?
I don't have much of a choice, do I?
You think I don't know about the mine, Eleanor? About what your husband and that Blackfoot bastard did? Wow. He really didn't tell you anything, did he?
Eleanor stiffens. Beside her, Nokoma goes still. Calloway's voice drops lower.
James wasn't an innocent man. And Nokoma, neither was your son. You know it. And that's why you're here, isn't it? You need to know, same as she does.
Eleanor swallows hard. Nokoma's fingers tighten on the grip of her rifle. She thinks of James's journal, the map, the secrets buried beneath their feet. And she makes a decision.
Nokoma, the tunnel behind us, how far do you think it goes?
At once, Nokoma glances back, reading the walls, the curve of the cavern.
Far enough, but it won't be an easy run.
Eleanor nods. She turns to Nathaniel.
On my signal, we move. Got it?
Without hesitation, Nathaniel nods once, grimacing. Eleanor takes a breath, then she moves first. She darts into the darkness. They run. The tunnel narrows, forcing them to duck and weave through crumbling wooden beams and jagged stone. Behind them, Calloway's men give chase. The ground shakes beneath their feet, unstable. Eleanor can hear Nokoma muttering under her breath, a prayer or a curse, she can't tell. Nathaniel stumbles, gritting his teeth. Eleanor grabs him, pulling him forward. Then, the tunnel widens, and they burst into a hidden chamber. And there it is. The thing James had been protecting. A wooden chest half buried in rock, a ledger, documents, gold, and something else. A Blackfoot artifact, old and untouched, sitting atop the treasure like a grave marker. Nokoma stares.
This is what James was hiding.
A harsh laugh behind them. They spin. Calloway stands in the tunnel entrance, gun raised.
Do you really think I came all this way for gold? I have all the money and power I want.
His eyes glint.
It was never about the money, woman.
Eleanor tightens her grip on her gun. Nathaniel groans, barely standing. Nokoma's expression is flat.
Your husband wanted to fix a mistake. He wanted to buy his way into redemption, back into my good graces. But I don't give second chances.
He cocks the hammer of his gun. The cavern is suddenly dead silent. Eleanor tightens her grip on her gun, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. The weight of Calloway's words sinks into her bones. James wanted to fix a mistake. The question is, what mistake? Calloway steps forward, boots crunching on loose rock. His gun remains steady, pointed at Eleanor's chest.
Tell me, widow, did James ever tell you about the heist?
Eleanor's stomach knots. She doesn't answer. Calloway's grin widens.
Didn't think so. Well, let me enlighten you.
Nathaniel, still wounded, shifts beside her. He's barely staying upright. Nokoma stands near the wooden chest, eyes locked on Calloway.
James wasn't the man you thought he was. He wasn't some poor rancher trying to make an honest living. He was a thief.
Eleanor's jaw tightens.
You're lying.
Calloway chuckles.
Am I?
He nods toward the chest of gold and ledgers.
That's not some lost fortune, Mrs. Whitmore. That's blood money. Stolen from the worst men the West had to offer. Crooked barons, corrupt lawmen, slavers. James and his crew didn't rob banks or rail cars. They robbed the devils in suits and ties. And you know what? They got away with it.
Eleanor swallows hard. Calloway tilts his head.
Until James grew a conscience and crossed me.
Eleanor's fingers tighten around the handle of her revolver.
He was trying to give it back?
Calloway nods slowly.
That's right. He thought if he buried it here, if he left a trail for someone worthy enough to find it, he could wash the blood off his hands. Your husband was a very dirty man.
He smirks.
Funny thing about blood and dirt, they never wash out, do they?
Nokoma suddenly speaks, her voice low and controlled.
And Tahonis? What happened to him?
Calloway's grin fades slightly. Eleanor glances at Nokoma, noticing for the first time the fire in her eyes. This isn't just about revenge. This is personal. Calloway shrugs.
It depends. You want the version James told or the truth?
Nokoma lifts her rifle an inch higher.
The truth.
Calloway sighs, shaking his head.
James and Tahonis were partners until they weren't. See, James was ready to walk away, to disappear. But Tahonis, he wasn't. He wanted justice. He wanted revenge. And James knew what that meant. It meant more blood.
His eyes flicker with amusement.
So Tahonis did what any desperate man would do. He tried to stop him.
Immediately, Nokoma's expression hardens. Eleanor feels the weight of the air shift.
You're saying James killed him?
Calloway doesn't blink.
I'm saying James thought he did. Even if it was an accident.
A heavy silence. Then, Nokoma steps forward. Her voice is steady, but her hands are trembling.
Tell me where he is.
Calloway smiles darkly.
Why, Nokoma? You planning to tell him the truth? That James wasn't just his friend, that he was his father?
Eleanor's blood turns to ice. She looks at Nokoma, but Nokoma doesn't deny it, because it's true. James Whitmore had a second life, a secret life. Tahonis wasn't just his partner, he was his son. Calloway's smile widens.
Bet that wasn't in his little journal, was it? Speaking of journals, the last time I saw your son, he had one with him, along with a knife in his ribs. Remember at the cabin?
Eleanor's hands begin to shake. Everything. Everything she thought she knew about her husband. A lie. Before she can process it, Calloway raises his gun.
Shame you won't live long enough to sort it all out.
Bang! Nathaniel throws himself forward, taking the bullet meant for Eleanor. He crumples to the ground. Eleanor screams. Nokoma fires. Bang! Calloway staggers, blood blossoming across his chest. Another shot, straight through his skull. He falls, dead. His men scatter and flee. The sun rises, casting long golden streaks across the rugged Montana valley. Eleanor and Nokoma stand over the open chest, its contents shimmering in the morning light. Gold bars, coins, ledgers filled with proof of stolen wealth. The weight of what they now know hangs heavy between them. Eleanor kneels beside the chest, running her fingers over the engraved markings on the gold bars.
If we leave it here, someone worse will find it. And we already know what they'll do with it. More evil.
Nokoma doesn't answer right away. She stares out over the valley, jaw tight, arms crossed. The wind pulls at her dark hair, but she stands firm, unmoving. Finally, she lets out a slow breath and speaks.
We take it, but we don't use it like they did.
Eleanor looks up, meeting her gaze. For the first time since they met, there is no hostility between them, a silent understanding. They will carry James's sins, but they will not repeat them. Eleanor exhales, sitting back on her heels. She should feel relief. Instead, there's a weight still crushing her chest. She looks at Nokoma, really looks at her, the woman James had known before her, the woman James never let go of. The elephant in the room can't be ignored anymore. Eleanor's voice is quiet, but steady.
How long?
Nokoma turns, brows furrowing.
What do you mean, how long?
Eleanor lifts Nokoma's chin.
How long were you with him? Before me?
Silence. Nokoma's gaze darkens slightly, but there's no avoidance, only truth. She tilts her head slightly, watching Eleanor.
Long enough to know him better than you ever did.
The words sting more than Eleanor wants to admit. She swallows, pushing past the ache.
And after he married me?
Nokoma looks away, shifting slightly. That's answer enough. Eleanor closes her eyes for a brief moment. Everything she thought she knew about James was a lie, or at least half of one. She exhales sharply, forcing her emotions down. Because deep down she knows the truth. James Whitmore made his choices, and now they were left to carry the weight of them. Nokoma finally turns back to Eleanor, and for the first time there's something softer in her expression. Not pity, not guilt, just understanding.
I never hated you, widow. You were just part of a story James never finished writing.
I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse.
Then you understand how I felt when he chose you.
That lands harder than Eleanor expects. She looks away, blinking at the horizon, at the endless stretch of land she no longer belongs to.
And Tahonis?
James knew. Maybe not at first, but in the end he knew Tahonis was his son.
Eleanor tightens her jaw, trying to ignore the fresh sting behind her ribs. James knew, and yet he never said a damn word. She lets out a slow, shaky breath. Another silence stretches between them. This time it's not tense. It's final. Eleanor nods once, more to herself than to Nokoma. Then she stands. She looks at the chest one last time before brushing her hands off on her coat.
So, what will you do now?
I go home. My people need more than just hope. They need power, and this money will certainly help.
Well, I'm heading back east. Start fresh, maybe find out who I am outside of James Whitmore's shadow.
Nokoma watches her for a long moment. Then, a slow nod. There is nothing left to say. Eleanor extends her hand. Nokoma hesitates. Then, finally, clasps it firmly. A silent respect. A shared history, as twisted and painful as it was. Then without another word, they part ways. One heading east, one heading west. Two women, forever changed. And behind them, the map that led them here, burns in the wind.